Welcome, everybody. So glad to see so many of your faces out here to explore what I think is one of the most important iPad apps ever made. That's a very bold statement, but it, especially for our context, I'm just so excited that we're able to now have it on all faculty and student devices by default. Will be useful across a huge variety of subjects, and even if teachers don't do a specific project asking students to use LiquidText, just the students having it on their own devices will let them use it as they see fit throughout their classes. So we have the founder and CEO of LiquidText, Craig Tashman, with us. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm doing very well. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate you taking the time. So I'm going to shut my mouth and just hand it over to you and let you take it from here.
Sure. Thank you so much. So what I want to do is, what we talked about is I'm going to start by showing you guys, I think, some slides that give a little bit of the theoretical background behind LiquidText. I gave a talk at Google a couple of years ago, and Morgan mentioned that it went over pretty well. And so I'm going to start by giving kind of an abbreviated version of that and go through and do a demo of the app. I think you guys are probably all fairly familiar with the app, I assume, but if you're not, this will be a chance to get familiar with it. And more than that, you'll get a chance to hear some of the sort of theoretical background behind it. Please don't hesitate to stop me with any questions. As Morgan mentioned, I have a hard stop at 3:50, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end or just as I'm going along. So with that said, I'm going to attempt to share my PowerPoint here and walk through a couple of quick slides with you guys, and we'll see if that actually works. Okay, do you guys hear me and see my screen? Cool, okay. All right, so title of the talk is, so maybe just stepping back a little more context. LiquidText comes out of my doctoral research from Georgia Tech. So if you're really interested, there's like hundreds of pages of like theoretical background you can read, but I don't think that's going to be that constructive unless you have a lot of time on your hands. But the principle of this talk is kind of the distillation of that. How computing can either really hurt, really devastate, or really support our ability to actually derive knowledge and meaning from the things that we read. So to begin with, do any of you guys or your students ever highlight, annotate, flip back and forth, make little margin notes in the things that you're reading? Well, yes, of course you do, right? And it turns out there's a term for this. It's called active reading. And it's basically anytime you're interacting with the reading medium itself, more than just kind of passively flipping pages, where you're expecting the reading medium to be able to kind of work for and with you. So this is great, but have you ever asked yourself, how do computers help us do active reading? And the sad truth is, in a lot of ways, they don't help us, that computers actually hurt us. It turns out like 80% of professional knowledge workers want to print their texts, and like 90% of students prefer paper texts as well. Like, this is a jarring thing. This means the technology that we're giving everyone to do reading in general is actually worse in many ways for understanding than the paper that they've been using for centuries. So we wanted to understand what's going on here. Like, why is reading on a computer just such a terrible experience? And so we ran these studies. So I went up to Michigan to a company we were working with when I was in grad school, and we interviewed students and engineers and executives and lawyers and all kinds of people. And we said, we want you to first keep a diary of every time you do active reading. And then we interviewed them and we talked to them about their active reading process. We asked them what's good, what's bad. We dove into the process really deeply. And then we had these workshops where we said, okay, we want you to envision with us the future of active reading. And so we gave them like cardboard and foam and markers, and we had them walk through this whole sort of discovery process of having them create their own vision of what the future of reading should be like. And the whole thing was really, really cool. But there were a couple of major discoveries that we made through it. And the first big chunk was understanding what are these problems with computers. And we found things like this. We found it's really hard to keep track of awareness of context across different documents, right? So you read one document, you read, let's say, a textbook, it gives you some understanding, then you go pull out Wikipedia article and start looking at that. And the understanding that you had from that textbook is starting to fade in your mind. It's hard to retrieve your annotations. You write margin notes and you have to find them again. It's hard to find them and remember where they're coming from. Even just moving between pages quickly is actually pretty tedious. It's hard to switch back and forth between documents, even worse than pages, my gosh. And then even being able to see enough text on the screen at a time is hard. The screen sizes are also an issue. So these weren't super surprising, but what was surprising to us was the second part of the results. That paper, it turns out, has about as many problems as computers. It's hard to organize and reorganize your notes. It's hard to stay aware of context within a document because the context is 6 pages back. It's hard to look at multiple pages at once. There's not enough margin space, as well as a lot of shared problems between paper and computers. And so we started to realize, the way designers have typically gone about creating reading software is generally by taking paper and kind of replicating it on a computer. And what we realized was this wasn't working. And as we dug deeper, we discovered the reason it isn't working is because the computers end up inheriting the limitations of paper without really inheriting its benefits. That again is why there are so many of these shared problems between paper and computers. And in fact, paper ends up being worse again because it's not really inheriting the benefits, but just the limitations of paper. So we said, we really need to go back to the beginning, approach this in a totally different way. And so we said, what is it about paper and computers? What is the shared deficiency between paper and computers that's causing these problems? And so to understand this, we looked at a theory called distributed cognition. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it. It's largely it's the product of a bunch of researchers, including guys like Ed Hutchins. The theory of distributed cognition is that we tend to think of cognition as something that happens in your brain, but this theory says, no, that's not really the right way of looking at it. Cognition is more of an emergent phenomenon that happens between people and between artifacts. As people go back and people transfer information between each other, and they transfer it back and forth between artifacts and people, right? So you'll write something on a sheet of paper, send it to your friend, who then sends something in, puts it in another form, adds some information from a textbook, then writes an email back to you, and so on and so forth. So there's taking information, there's transforming it, and there's transferring it back and forth. Okay, very interesting abstract theory. But this notion of transferring and transforming information, how does that connect to reading on paper? Well, let's look at what kind of transformations do you do when you read, right? Well, you take your notes, right? You want to rearrange them, reorganize them so that you can prepare for a test, right? You want to take some margin comments you had and connect them to another document, maybe a website that you were reading that pertains to them, that helps add some color to them. You simply want to be able to move your text around so you have more space to write more notes. You have notes in one notebook sheet, and then you have notes in the margin of a textbook somewhere, and you want to show that those two are connected. And you kind of are doing all this stuff in your head, but you're not able to really do it in the medium. So you're not really able to transform the information in a way that you can easily come back to it, in a way that you can remember it, in a way that you can share it. So the transforming part is actually really, really tough with paper. Paper in a lot of ways is good for embellishing, but it's very hard for transforming. So in a nutshell, what we found was computers are broken. Why are computers broken? Because paper is broken, and the computers were modeled on paper. And what is the cause of both of their brokenness? Effectively, it boils down to a lack of representational flexibility. Paper is in a lot of ways just too darn rigid. So we said, how can we change this? How can we create a reading medium that gives you representational flexibility? Well, the first thing is we said, all the way people have approached reading is these desktop-like metaphors, right? You have files, you have folders, you have stapled documents. And the problem is, again, those are just way too rigid. We said, what if we used different metaphors? Metaphors based more around fluidity, metaphors that have many degrees of freedom, right? And so if we're going to do that, we realized we kind of needed to start with a touch screen. Why do we just start with a touch screen? Well, have you ever thought about if you had a violin app on your, I don't know how many of you play an instrument, I don't, but if you had a violin app on your laptop, it would be really hard to use it. Why? because the keyboard and the mouse that your laptop is designed around aren't really good for controlling a lot of degrees of freedom at once. They're just not meant for that. But we realized if we want to give people representational flexibility in their documents, we need to actually give them a way of controlling those documents, many factors of those documents, efficiently and quickly. And so, at least as a starting point, we realized we needed to use multi-touch. And so we started designing and prototyping and building things. And before I get on to findings, this is probably a great time to pause and actually show you a demo of the app itself. So with this in place, let me see if I can move over and share my screen here. Beautiful. Okay. So now let's go through an actual little demo of LiquidText. So again, this, if any of you guys have ever seen our Honeybee demo, this is what I'm going to be showing you live, but let me know if you have any questions as I'm going. So what's the story here? So let's say you're a honeybee researcher and you've discovered there's some strange new ailment that's affecting North America's honeybees, and you want to try to figure out what's wrong and do something about it. So we've already loaded all the documents we're going to need into LiquidText. And we're going to start by making a little text box here. Symptoms. Symptoms of this terrible new bee-afflicting disease called bee-afflicting disease. So the first thing I want to do is I want to pull out the symptoms. You see, I have one of the documents about it here. And so I'm going to take my mouse, or I'm going to take my pencil rather, and select the first symptom. And again, I'm just going to take my pen or my finger and drag this right out into the workspace. Okay, great. And now I'll take the second one. That the bees aren't producing as much honey, I'll drag this guy out as well. And the third one, that their flight speed seems to be slower, and drag this out as well. Great. So you notice the first thing I'm doing, I'm able to start gathering and aggregating information together. This is kind of the first piece of transformation, right? It doesn't really matter where the information is in the original document. I can bring it together in whatever form and shape I want. And one of the cool things about this, that I'll show you more later, is you can touch the little link buttons on each of these excerpts I pulled out, and it takes you right to the source and shows you where the source is in the original document. Okay, well, I noticed this one point they made about the slower flight speed. They referenced a figure that's a few pages down. I'd really like to compare that figure with this text. So I'm going to take 2 fingers and squeeze the document, and look what happens. I can crunch the document up so it squeezes. I can pinch it together like rubber. So I can bring the text on page 1 and chart on page 3 side by side. So again, this notion of being able to change the representation so I can bring the important things together and see them at once. Well, that's great. So I see this chart. I'm going to just select this. Actually, I'll do it by ink. I'm going to select this chart by drawing a little circle around it here and just drag it out like this into my workspace. I'll make it a little smaller, and I'll connect it to the flight speed comment or flight speed excerpt. So again, gathering information, different pages, different documents, all into the same place. All right, that's great. But now I'd like to find out, are there any existing bee ailments that in any way resemble this new bee afflicting disease? So I'm going to make another little text box here and write related ailments. And I'll make this a little bigger. I'm going to use some more ink in this case rather than just text. And so I'm going to open the document I already found that talks about a lot of different bee disorders. And I've already highlighted some of the interesting ones, but I couldn't find anything that seems to match the symptoms of bee afflicting disease. But I'm wondering if maybe I can get an overview of it and see the bigger picture. So I'm going to turn on something called highlight view. I'm going to tap in the upper right corner here, turn on highlight view. And now when I pinch, something really cool happens. It brings all of my highlights together like this. See, the more I squeeze it, the more the highlights come together. If I unsqueeze a little bit, I see more context around them. So this is really powerful because now again, I'm bringing the important things together. I can see them at once. If I decide I want to dig in a little deeper, I just put my fingers down, squeeze apart around one of these highlights, and I get the context, squeeze together, and I see them all together again. Okay, so excuse me. So as I scroll, now I notice something really interesting. I notice that over on page 6, there's something that's noted that's talking about a 50 to 60% decrease in flight speed. Well, that is one of the symptoms of bee afflicting disease. So I'm going to put a little checkbox there, and I'm going to write speed over here, and I'm actually going to draw a line connecting these guys. Look at that. So I can actually create live ink links going between my document and my notes. Now I notice a little bit later down on page 10, there's a change in color as well for the bees for some other illness. So I'm going to write color, and I'm also going to draw a line connecting these guys. So now, again, the idea is not only can I discover these connections by bringing the important things together, I can capture the connections by drawing ink links between the document and my workspace. Okay, now I'll uncollapse this. I'll go back to normal mode. Now let's start by digging a little deeper into this whole speed issue. So I'll tap this button here, and it brings me to tarditis. Okay, that's the first ailment that seems to be involved here. So I wonder, maybe tarditis is in some way related to this bee afflicting disease. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to take tarditis, pull it out here. And then I see this very nice little chart that talks about the way it affects flight speed. I'm going to take that, circle it, and pull it out as well and connect it. Great. So now there was that second one about the color. So I really want to, I can just tap this link, this the little button here, and it brings me down to the ink, it follows that ink link I drew earlier to show me what color pointed to, something called rubrum disease. But I'd really like to compare the tarditis and the rubrum disease sections side by side. Well, how can I do that? I don't feel like having to manually jump back and forth, so I can do something really, really special here. I can, unfortunately, you can't see my fingers, but I'm going to take one finger, I'm going to hold it on the screen near tarditis. And then I'm going to take my other finger and I'm going to touch that little link. And look what it does. It kept the part under my first finger in place while showing me the part I was referring to with my second finger. Really, really powerful. You can literally hold your finger in the page of a book on your computer. Amazing. So I look at them side by side, and this is very interesting because now I notice something really fascinating. I notice that tarditis is a bacterial infection, while rubrum disease is a viral illness. I'm like, well, this makes no sense. How could these both be related to this bee afflicting disease? One's a virus and one's a bacteria. I don't even understand it. So I say, I need to go a little bit deeper into rubrum disease. So first of all, I'm going to pull out the little title here, rubrum disease, and just bring that over to the side. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take a second document that I got that talks about rubrum disease and drag it out and down here. And look what it's going to do. It's going to show me both documents side by side. So now I can read about tarditis right next to this paper about rubrum disease. Well, okay, that's great. So now I can start really integrating content between documents, flipping back and forth between them super easily. So I'm going to take this little picture of the poor red honeybee here, pull it out, and connect it in here. But again, I still don't really understand what's going on, but now I notice something really, really fascinating. Here. Okay, I noticed that it says tarditis is spread by the gray mite, and it also says that this rubrum disease thing down here also is spread by the gray mite. Well, that's huge. That's a major revelation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to capture that connection. So I'm actually going to draw an arrow from the first document into the second one. And so look what I've done. I've created a live ink link crisscrossing between my documents. So this means later on, if I say, what was the other thing that dealt with the gray mite? I can just tap this little ink link here and it reconstitutes that connection. It shows me the other thing that's pointed to. So notice this isn't hard. I'm not like having to go find the connection tool and I'm having to find the clipping tool. I do everything with just one tool, just with ink. It's meant to be really simple, really, really low overhead. So I go here and I say, all right, this is great. Somehow the gray mite is involved with all this, but I don't really understand how. So I want to read a little bit more about the gray mite. So I'm going to open a gray mite paper here. And okay, so first thing, let's pull out a link to the gray mite. All right, very nice. And I look through this and I don't really see anything that's too helpful. I don't see how the gray mite could really be involved, but they do mention the gray mite is lethal to crickets. So I'll pull that out. Now, how could crickets be involved in this? Well, I'm not sure, but I'm going to do a search. So I'm going to tap the little search button up here, and I'm going to write cricket and just see if there's anything that could help me. And then I'm going to go to more and search all documents and file. So now there's something really cool. You notice on the side now, all of my documents have folded up, except the ones that mention crickets. And you see the first one is the gray mite. The second one is a hive inspection sheet. Well, I'm going to click that. Let's see what they say. Oh, interesting. There's a mention of crickets here. And I can, first of all, I can pinch with my fingers to bring all of the references together, although in this case it's boring because there's only one. And now I can zoom in, I can see, they said that at this particular beehive where they've been having this bee afflicting disease problem, they mentioned they haven't had any pests, not even crickets. Oh my gosh, that's huge. So I'm going to take this, pull this out, make this red, because I think we've solved our problem. The gray mites have been getting into these hives and infecting the bees with both tarditis and rubrum disease. And that's why their color is changing and they're flying slow. Well, this is huge. So I think we need to publish a paper on this really fast. So we're going to start by going up here and we're going to go to something called Notes Outline. What Notes Outline does is it takes all of the notes I wrote, all the highlights and everything in my workspace, and organizes it together into a nice linear Word document. So now I can send this guy off to Word. Let's see if I happen to have Word set up on this particular iPad here. Should copy to Word. Lovely. Okay, beautiful. And so now you see it dropped this right into Word. Now we can go finish this up, polish it, and send this right off to the conference. Now, the conference committee says the paper looks interesting, but they have some questions. They're wondering about the sources of some of these bits of information I'm talking about. Well, normally finding the sources of this could actually be very tricky. But again, with LiquidText, it's easy. I just tap any of these little links in the workspace and it takes me immediately right to the source. And if I really want to, if I want to be a superpower user about this, I can actually even hold down multiple links at once. And it'll bring up both documents at the same time, or even 3 documents at the same time, so I can see them all and compare them. And so we send this off to the conference, the paper gets accepted, and we save the honeybees. The end. So with that said, let me pause if you guys have any questions, and then I can go on and tell you a little bit more about what we found when we did the testing behind this and how people have been reacting to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig.
Sure.
So I muted everybody's microphones. So if you want to jump in, just make sure you unmute yourself first.
Any questions? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I'll show you something briefly. We actually are about to release a whole new version of LiquidText, like a couple of major new ones. We're about to release it for the PC, for Windows, which we're incredibly excited about. And we're actually getting ready to release it for macOS as well. And as Morgan and I have been talking about, we're going to be releasing a synchronization service. So all the 3 different apps on your Mac, on your PC, and on your iPad will be able to beautifully sync with each other. We're expecting that to be coming into beta during the summer. But earlier than that, we actually have a new iPad version that's going to be coming out very soon as well. And this is it. You notice we've spiffed up the design a little bit, made it a little bit cleaner and a little bit simpler. And one of the things that we've done that we're really excited about is we've added tagging. Oh, I see. We've added tagging. And so, for example, now if you pull out a couple of excerpts, I can say something like project ABC, and we add a tag to it. And we can do this one, project 123, and we add a tag as well. And so you can add as many different tags as you want, and then later on you can search for them. And so we could say, I want to find everything with tag project 123. Oops, need to do it in the workspace. Here we are. And you see it'll unhighlight all the excerpts except for the ones that actually fit. And so this is great. So we're really excited about this. This way, if for your students, if they have large, complicated workspaces with information from a lot of different sources, they can start the process of analyzing that by just applying tags to these things. And then they can use the search functions to start looking through those tags, organizing them, and making sense of them as they go on to write their papers. So this is going to be coming soon. Really excited about it.
That's great.
Thank you.
And
okay.
Did we also, oh, sorry, I see Amy has a hand up. Let me just ask this question real quick and then we'll go to Amy. Did you,
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a collaborative version in the work where
yes,
multiple people might be able to work on the same workspace?
Absolutely. That's a piece of our larger synchronization and collaboration service that we're going to be putting into beta this summer.
Great. So yeah, if anyone on this call is interested in helping beta test that, let me know and we can work with Craig to put it through its paces.
Absolutely. Cool.
So okay. Amy, there you go. You're unmuted.
Hi. So
hey, Amy.
I don't know how to phrase the question, but so when you take the stuff in your workspace and you put it into a Word document into sort of an outline, students then have to go in and like paraphrase things, right? Because it takes actual quotes from the text. Like at what point do students need to actually do the work of paraphrasing?
Yeah, so it depends. If they want to just keep the text directly quoted, they could just put quotes around it. We'll go to Word and we'll actually make this a little more concrete here. So you can see, for example, we have this excerpt that I pulled out, reddish purple coloring from the honeybees. And so this already has this, the citation below it of where it comes from. And if the student wanted, they could just put quotes around this and then just incorporate this directly into the text they're writing. If they wanted instead to paraphrase it, then this would just be the time to overwrite it and write their own thoughts there instead. So we try to make it very easy for the student to be able to use the direct quotes by including the citation there and everything. But to your point, we expect that this is a very good opportunity for them to paraphrase. Another way to paraphrase, and that for some students might actually be easier, is to use comments. And so one of the things that you can do is you can select, we'll go in the standard version here because this is what you'll be getting right now. You can select some text, you can hit comment, and you can write, I think this is great, or something a little bit deeper than that, and then pull it out into the workspace. And basically now it behaves very similarly to an excerpt, except it's listed as a comment rather than an excerpt. And so the power of this is that you can have the students, if they choose, they can start interpreting the text and making sense of the text as they're actually reading through it. So you can kind of have a mix of excerpts and comments and paraphrases as the students actually going through the text the first time.
And you can tell the difference between them by the color coding, right? Like purple is comment and turquoise is excerpt.
And in notes outline in the exporter, it makes that really clear because it actually says, you can even see here, it says comment down here, comment versus excerpt. So particularly in what you export, we make it very, very clear.
Great. Craig, what about native text if you're just writing with your pencil on the workspace? Will that also be pulled out?
Yes, so absolutely. And the way we do that is, again, these text boxes, so they look like little text boxes, but they're actually basically little mini word processor windows. And so you can go on and write full formatted, not super richly formatted yet, but nice, proper text. And then this will just go out along with everything else.
What if you're just writing with your pencil in the workspace?
If you're writing with your pencil in the workspace, that won't go out in the Word file. We don't have ink to text transcription. You can get that out, but that's going to be more through PDF export. And so, for example, if we let me show you what I mean by that. Let's find something that'll open a PDF here. Acrobat. And so, for example, if we export if we export a PDF of the workspace directly, then you see you get the full Fidelity workspace, not reorganized or anything. You get it in its original form. And then any text or anything that you write there will be preserved. But since we don't have built-in ink to text at this point, it would be very hard to do that in a format that would make sense for Word. However, the caveat to that is that if you create a text box, actually rather than text box, we can use an ink box. You can just create an ink box like this and just start writing in this. And if you can make a few of these, and then of course, when you go to notes outline, I'm pretty sure in this version, yes, this will actually be included in your export.
Okay, great.
But if
so
you just
key there is to make a box rather than just write in the overall workspace.
Exactly. And you can make as many of these boxes as you want, of course.
On the note of workspace, I think people would be very impressed to see. So all we've seen so far is just kind of the zoomed in view of this particular area of Craig's notes. But if he zooms out, you can see you get almost, it feels like an infinite amount of space to compile your notes.
Yes, and that's actually one of the things that people love. LiquidText is really designed to work with large spaces and actually pretty large quantities of notes. And so we even color code, we break it up into squares, we color code them so that you can kind of maintain a sense of orientation within it. And we even do nice little things, like as you zoom out, we have these little notes that pop up, these little diagonal cues so that, to help the user remember where they are and remember roughly what each part of the notes refers to. And one of the things that we have in the next version that your students might appreciate is we're going to let you configure the workspace for the first time. So you can actually set the workspace to a loose leaf mode. So you make it into nice pages, each of which actually has a slightly different background color, loose leaf organization. You can set the size and the color and everything. And we think that especially for people who are really building big workspaces, this is going to be a great feature.
Awesome.
Cool. And we try to make the zoom in, zoom out really fast because we know iPad screens aren't huge. So you can just double tap the screen to zoom out and then double tap somewhere else to zoom in, as well as the standard pinch gestures and everything. Again, we want to try to make it really fast to navigate through all this.
Great. So I see Kelsey and Joe raise their hands. Let's take you in that order.
I was just curious if I'm missing something, but are all of these documents stored locally? Because I had been using this app in the fall. I switched iPads and all of the things that I had done were lost.
Yes, right now this app is fully local. So if you switch iPads, you'll definitely want to do an Apple backup and restore. We do work with Apple's iCloud backup system. So when you backup and restore, your files should actually be transferred over. To give a more robust solution to this, once we have our backup and syncing, or once we have our syncing service, in addition to collaboration, the first thing that's going to be doing is backup across devices. So as you get more devices, you'll be able to sign in with a common LiquidText account, whether on your iPad, your PC, or your Mac, and your documents will be able to sync over. But for right now, until that's out, you'll definitely want to use iCloud backup to back up and restore when you move to a new iPad.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so I was wondering, when have you noticed that, or if ever, it begins to get kind of laggy if you have a certain number of pages open or a certain number of documents on the side? So can you comfortably work with 15, 20 documents? Is it more on the kind of 5 or so? And are you talking like 30 pages or 300 pages?
So yes, you have a good point, and you have a good question, and there's a good point within that on a couple of levels. So the app will eventually become laggy in its current form. It is one of the things we're working on and that we're trying to actually fix with the new version that we're going to be releasing soon. In this form, having a lot of documents itself won't really make any difference. So you can have 100 documents there on the side, and that won't make it laggy because the app is actually pretty smart about quickly loading and unloading documents. So only a couple of them are ever actually kept in memory at any given time. So that shouldn't have much effect. You have long documents. We have lawyers reading through documents that are many thousands of pages on this. And like a 2,000 page document, for example, shouldn't really be slowing it down. What's more going to slow it down is if you're using a document that's like a scanned in text. So each page is a big image. That's potentially actually going to make it get a little laggy. Not horrible, but it's not going to be quite as smooth and fast as it is with a more typical PDF that you use, a non-scanned PDF. What can also do it is if you start filling the workspace with a lot of things. Like once you start getting thousands of excerpts into the workspace, again, not terrible, but not quite as fast and wonderful as it is like this. I'll tell you that our new version should actually largely resolve that. But once you get into the thousands of excerpts, it's not going to be as completely like smooth as silk as it is right now.
Thanks.
Sure. But just to emphasize, the people who are using this range from students working with a few pages, again, to lawyers working on, one attorney who spoke with us was like read a 40,000 pages of notes for trials on this. It's generally designed to be fairly robust. So I think for the most part, you probably shouldn't run into too many issues around lag, again, other than very large scanned PDFs.
Oh, by the way, I see some other hands. We'll call on you 1 second. But we've just seen PDFs here, but note that you can also import any URL, and that just auto converts it to a PDF, right?
Yes, and I'm really glad you mentioned that. That's a great point. So just to show that, go to Add, Web Page, and you can just actually bring up any web page. And so we could go to Wikipedia lasers, let's say, just to demonstrate this. Bring up the page and hit import, and it brings it right in. So this is a terrific point, and I appreciate mentioning that. This is one of the things that's most useful about this, because so much of the research we do is mixed between PDFs, web pages, and also Word documents and PowerPoints. And we actually can import Word documents and PowerPoints as well.
And I see image as well.
Yes.
I have not messed around with that too much, but I'm curious if you have any clients who have really put that component through its paces.
We haven't spoken with anyone who really has, but in principle, it should generally be fine. The only issue is going to be, it is an iPad. The memory is a little bit limited. If you try importing a large number of very, very high resolution images as one document, it might start to get a little bit laggy or issuey. But but again, in general, it's pretty smart about loading and unloading pages as it needs them. So I would say give it a try, and if it starts to get laggy, let me know. But it generally should be pretty solid around that.
All right. And I guess that sort of answers the other question that another colleague who couldn't be here today, she's actually on sabbatical, but she's one of the early adopters of this. And she thought it would be really amazing if you were able to import videos as well and make notations, kind of on the timeline of the video. But I'm assuming that's a current limitation of the hardware at the moment.
No, I mean, the hardware isn't. The hardware could totally, iPads are fundamentally able to. It's just a limitation of, as a small company, we still need to stay, relatively focused, so we don't diffuse out too much. And video is a really interesting scenario. We've thought about it, and eventually we'll probably add it, but not yet.
Cool. All right, that's my questions. Let's get on to Janet and Katie.
So my question was, I had downloaded a PDF file of The Great Gatsby because I'm using it with my class, and I was curious. I was trying to see how I could go to a particular chapter, but it looked like I just had to scroll my way down to it. And I was wondering if there was any way that within the document, like when I see it, I downloaded it from a URL. There's a place normally where you can click and go directly to a particular chapter, but
yes.
I can see that on LiquidText. I was wondering.
Thank you. Good, great question. We actually do support that. We have a table of contents viewer built into it. I don't think any of the documents I have open right now have a table of contents, but if you notice on the bottom left, there's a little button. See, I'm kind of touching it now, and it's saying no table of contents. But unfortunately, I don't have a way of showing where my finger is pointing to. But if you look on the scroll bar, right, move the scroll bar down, 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 see that little thing it's about to bang into down there? That's the table of contents button. If you touch that, it should bring up a table of contents if your document has one.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Cool. And I'll tell you, just for FYI, in the upcoming version, it's going to be a little bit different. The table of contents is outlined here. And if your document has one, you'll tap this and it'll show the table of contents right here. And you can actually keep it persistent. So it can stay open as long as you want and everything.
Great.
Great.
I'm going to play around with that now. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
I just had a question about non-Roman characters, texts that are written in non-Roman characters. Is you know, like in Chinese simplified or traditional characters. Does LiquidText just handle that well?
Yeah, and so it's a very good question. The answer is yes and no. The characters in principle are generally handled fine. There's a couple caveats to that though. The first is that some PDFs are not encoded very well because the stuff we do, most companies don't do, thankfully. And so the PDFs are sometimes encoded a little strange. And so it's actually hard or impossible to properly extract the characters. But I'll tell you that Asia is actually one of our biggest markets. And in general, Asian characters don't present a problem. What sometimes does present a problem is the way we define spaces doesn't really map to the way Asian characters are used. And so some people complain that they end up pulling out a whole line or only a single character when they really just want a subset of characters. So I would give it a try first, but in general, we're not super optimized for Asian text, but it seems to work pretty well.
And just can I follow up with European languages and diacritical marks? Are those all okay, or accents and things?
Those should be fine. But again, as long as it's encoded properly in the PDF itself, those should be fine extracting those.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Well,
I have one other quick
Sure.
question. Does it make more sense to look at this landscape as opposed to portrait? So when you're taking notes, it's
a good question. It depends on the phase of the work. We kind of originally envisioned this more in a landscape mode. Using it in portrait can be great. And it's probably especially great when you're in the early phases of reading, when you're just taking more, annotations on the document, highlighting things, and pulling out the excerpts. When you kind of want to view the document and the workspace side by side, we tend to say I tend to personally think landscape is a little bit better. But it should work well for both. I'll tell you in this version, it can be a little bit tricky because when you go into a portrait mode, the workspace automatically goes below the document. And sometimes it's actually not what people want. Sometimes you want the workspace to be next to the document, even in portrait. That's a feature that we're going to have in the next version. But for now, yeah, we have plenty of people who use it in portrait and they seem to like it. So I would say our original vision was more around landscape, but we have tried to make it a beautiful portrait experience as well. Cool. Well, I'll tell you one other potentially useful thing. We have a little help button on the top of the app, and this lists all the major interactions that the app supports. So if you're wondering how do you do that pinch to see all the highlights, what else is supported with comments, how do you do all these cool comparison things, we actually have nice little videos for pretty much all of these demonstrating how to do these interactions. We also have a way for you to chat with our customer support. So we try to make, this app is meant to have a very low floor. You can get started pulling out excerpts really easily, but we also try to give it a really high ceiling. So as you get more advanced, the app kind of has room to continue to work with you and get more advanced as well. If you have any questions along that process, though, we want to make it really easy for you to see how to use those advanced features, how to contact our customer support, so you and the app can kind of grow together. And beyond that, please let Morgan or I know if you have any questions, if you have any feedback. As you guys keep on using this, we would love to stay in touch with you and hear how it goes, hear where your students are really succeeding with it, hear where your students, might need some additional features or some additional changes to it. We really want to be partnering with you guys through this journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig.
Cool. Thank you so much, Morgan. Thank you so much, all of you guys. I wish you the very best, and best wishes as you guys are working remotely.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. I will end. I must leave now to run off to my next meeting. Thank you guys again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right.
Thanks
Thanks
a
for your
lot.
time, Craig.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you.